Yep. So yesterday we looked at the Chiddush that not a single city made shalom with Bnei Yisrael other than the Givonim, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted them to be destroyed, and we compared it to the discussion of Hashem hardening Paro's heart. Now, I then want to continue. This is still Perek Yud Aleph. And I want to just again look at a few verses and just show you how sometimes, there's a saying, Chazal have an important saying, Divrei Torah, Aniyim b'makom echad, v'yashirim b'makom acher. That the words of Torah are sometimes poor in one place and rich in another place, which means you don't understand something unless you consider other places. This is true in Gemara, it's true in Chumash, it's true in Nach. So here we're going to have an interesting example of you read a pasuk and you totally misunderstand it unless you look at psukim in a number of other places. It mentions here, right after it says Hashem hardened the heart of the nations, Perek Yud Aleph pasuk Chaf Aleph says, V'yavo Yehoshua ba'esahi, v'yachreis es ha'anakim min ahar min Hebron, Min Devir, Min Einav, Mikol Har Yehuda, Mikol Har Yisrael, Im Areim Hecharim Yehoshua, Lo Naisar Anokim Bi'aretz B'nei Yisrael, Rak Bi'aza, B'gas U'Bi'ashdod Nisharu. So here it introduces a group of people that we do read about in the Chumash itself, and these are called the Anakim. Anakim means the giants. Right? Eretz Canaan had people that were known as the giants. Remember, the Meraglim talk about how gigantic the people were, and we were be'einenu kechagavim, we were like grasshoppers in our eyes. V'chein hayinu be'eineihem, and so we were in their eyes. These were Anakim. Now, you have to understand, just al pi pshat, Anakim does not mean, they were 50-foot monsters. Anakim could mean, Baron Trump is Anak, whatever it is. In other words, unusually tall people, but not necessarily super giants. So we don't necessarily have to posit some miraculous point, but they were very fearsome. They were very, very great warriors. And we know from Parsha Shalach that their main area was around Hebron. Hebron had Anakim, and we're even told who the fearsome Anakim were. In the Torah itself, we're given the names of the big three, Achiman, Sheshai, Talmai. Those are names in the Chumash itself. Yelidei Ha'anak, who were the children of an earlier giant. Okay? So those names are in the Chumash at the time of the Meraglim, and apparently 40 years later they're still around, because in Yoshua's time they're mentioned again. So it says here, Yehoshua destroyed the Anakim from the mountains of Hebron, including other cities, Devir, Anaf, these are cities around Hebron, and there were no longer any Anakim except in certain coastal areas which had Philistine giants, and these were the cities of Gaza, Gat, and Ashdod. These are along the Mediterranean coast, and we will see that Yoshua never conquered those coastal cities. Those coastal cities remained unconquered for a very, very long time. So, if you read this narrative, you get the impression that Yehoshua, with the Jewish army, was the one who conquered and vanquished Hebron. Because it says he destroyed the Anakim that are in Hebron. Now, an extra proof to the idea that Hebron was a conquered city is at the end of Perek Yud Beis. Perek Yud Beis, you'll recall, lists 31 kings that Yoshua had subjugated. 31, Lamed Aleph Malachim. And among them is the king of Hebron. So we have two textual indicators, one in Perek Yud Aleph and one in Perek Yud Beis, that Yehoshua in the 7 years of conquest had conquered Hebron. Perek Yud Aleph says he conquered Hebron and killed the Anakim in Hebron. And Perek Yud Beis lists the Melech of Hebron. Remember, every city had a king in those days. The Melech of Hebron was one of the 31 kings Yoshua vanquished. Okay, so if you were to simply stop your learning at Perek Yud Beis and you'd be asked a question, did Yoshua conquer Hebron? Your answer would be yes. Here's the problem. Later on in the book of Yoshua itself, in Perek Yud Daled, and we'll go over the story in much more detail. It's a very long story and a very interesting story. It is none other than Yoshua ben Nun's very, very dear friend, Kalev ben Yefuneh. Imagine the old-time conversations that they would have, right? These were 40 years earlier. 40 years earlier. 12 spies were sent. And two of those spies were Yoshua ben Nun and Kalev ben Yefuneh. And they were the only two spies who had emunah in Hashem, who gave a favorable report. And the whole generation wandered in the desert for 40 years. And the only survivors, besides the women, and Rashi says Shevet Levi actually, but other than Shevet Levi and other than the women, the only survivors are Yoshua ben Nun and Kalev. Right? Both of them are very elderly at this point. And Kalev makes the interesting point. He says, I am as energetic now as I was then. And he asked Yehoshua for special permission to conquer Hebron with his own private army. And he asked Yehoshua to get possession of Hebron, meaning the division of the land was normally by lottery. But Kalev requested a special allotment. He wanted Hebron. And in Perek Yud Daled, we actually read that Kalev conquered Hebron, and Hebron was given to him as his ancestral Yerusha. In fact, all of Eretz Yisrael was divided by lottery, except for two people. Only two people got a direct grant without going through a lottery process. The two people are Kalev, who was given Hebron as his ancestral inheritance, and the other was Yehoshua ben Nun himself, who requested an estate in the mountains of Ephraim. Yehoshua was from Ephraim, and he requested a particular town. So Yehoshua and Kalev did not have to go through the lottery process. Everybody else did. So, obviously, therefore, if Perek Yud Aleph and Perek Yud Beis tell me Yehoshua conquered Hebron, but Perek Yud Daled actually tells me Kalev ben Yefuneh conquered Hebron, so how do you reconcile it? Well, the answer would be that since Kalev did it under Yoshua's leadership, so we can call that a conquest of Yoshua. You might call it a conquest of Yoshua, albeit Kalev. So when you read in Perek Yud Aleph, Yehoshua conquered Hebron, and he destroyed the Anakim, it's not literal. It actually means Kalev conquered Hebron, and he destroyed the Anakim, but he was like a shaliach of Yehoshua doing it for the benefit of Am Yisrael. Right? So that's how you would reconcile those three verses. Right? Perek Yud Aleph says Yehoshua conquered Hebron and destroyed the Anakim. Perek Yud Beis says Yehoshua conquered the king of Hebron. Perek Yud Daled says Kalev conquered Hebron and Kalev killed the Anakim. So the answer is going to be Kalev was essentially a shaliach under Yoshua's leadership. Right? So when we say, just like when we say Yehoshua conquered, that doesn't mean he personally conquered. So all of that is great. Problem, that the story of Kalev conquering Hebron is in Perek Yud Daled of Yehoshua, but it's also in Perek Aleph of the book of Shoftim. The same story is repeated with some details. And there you see that Kalev, in fact, did not conquer Hebron. till after the death of Yehoshua. Which means, in spite of the mashmos of Perek Yudalit, that Kalev conquered Hebron in the lifetime of Yehoshua, in point of fact, the book of Shoftim tells me Hebron was not conquered till afterwards. So that already is a very difficult kasha. If Hebron was not conquered until after the death of Yehoshua, then how could Yehoshua conquer the king of Hebron? And how could Yehoshua conquer the giants in Hebron? In other words, the difficulty is that there seems to be a real contradiction between Sefer Yehoshua and Sefer Shoftim. So the short answer is, that's often given, is that there are different districts and different areas and different sub-areas. Some areas Yehoshua conquered, some areas Kalev conquered, some areas were conquered in Yeshua's lifetime, some areas were conquered later, meaning the total conquest of Hebron was not until after Yeshua died. There must have been a partial conquest. Again, we'll see this by Yerushalayim as well, a kind of a similar problem. So make a note that the story of Kalev and Hebron, which we'll get into more detail shortly, there seems to be an inconsistency, a stira, between Sefer Yehoshua and Sefer Shoftim, and you have to read all of the psukim in order to bring it together. Okay. Be it as it may, we have a list of 31 Canaanite kings that Yehoshua vanquished, although there were large areas in the north and in the south that were not conquered. But in most of the country, there were 31 kings that were vanquished. The Gemara in Megillah makes an important observation regarding how you write this in a klaf. Now, again, everyone knows, of course, Sifrei Torah are written on parchment, and there are halachos regarding them. But the truth of the matter is, Nevi'im and Kesuvim also have halachos, how they're supposed to be written. Now here in yeshivas, you can see this. We read a haftarah from klaf. So Nevi'im, but obviously, there are far fewer klafim of Nevi'im and Kesuvim than there are of Torah, because fewer people demand it. Although it's true that optimally a haftarah should be read, not from a chumash and not even from a Tanakh, but should be read from a klaf. In Chutz La'aretz, it's not that common. You'll have the Megillah Esther from a klaf and Torah from a klaf. Everything else is from a chumash or a nach. But l'chatchila, a klaf is the best way to go. And the same way there are rules about how you write a Sefer Torah, there are rules of how you write Nevi'im and Kesuvim. Now, the Gemara lays down a rule that certain types of listings or certain types of poems, like Oz Yashir, have to be written in a certain configuration that is called Ariach al Gabe Levena. It should be written in the shape of an Ariach. You will not see this in a printed chumash, but it should be written Ariach. Ariach is a half brick, and Levena is a whole brick, meaning one line is short and one line is a little longer. Short line, like one or two words. Longer line, which may only be 4 words or something. Then short, long, short, long, short, long, short, long. That's the way Oz Yashir is written, if you look in a chumash, etc. And that configuration is called Ariach al Gabe Levena. Half brick on top of long brick, half brick on top of long brick. Half whole, half whole, half whole. But there are 2 situations, actually there are more, but there are 2 the Gemara talks about, in which instead of Ariach al Gabe Levena, we have Ariach al Gabe Ariach, meaning it's just like a column of short, 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 short. It does not alternate with long lines. You just have 1 or 2 words on a line, and then 1 or 2 words on the next line. And it mentions that the 2 instances in Nach where the tsura is Ariach al Gabe Ariach are the Aseres B'nei Haman, right? The 10 sons of Haman were hung, and it lists those names. And if you looked in a klaf, Megillah Esther, you will see it just says a name, and under it is another name, and under it is another name. right? There's no, it's just short lines. It's Ariach al Gabi Ariach. It's not Ariach al Gabi Levena. And the other example of Ariach al Gabi Ariach is a listing of the 31 kings that Yehoshua conquered. It is written as a column with only one name per line. This king, that king, that king, that king, that king. Ariach. It does not fill the line. And the Gemara explains, what is the significance of Ariach al Gabi Ariach? And that is, it's like dominoes, or just, if you have just a column, imagine even with Svarim, you put a bunch of let's say light books, light pamphlets, notebooks, on top of each other. So if you simply sneeze, they're all going to fall. Masha'en kain, if they're different lengths, so sometimes even if the top falls, it may get caught by the wider one. The wider one could be like a net that catches. So the remez of Ariach al Gabi Ariach, the Gemara says, is Shalo Tehei Tekuma Lemapalasan, that there will be no recovery from their downfall. Their downfall, their destruction is total. Meaning, the picture, just in terms of a picture, the picture of Ariach al Gabi Levena suggests the notion of a net that captures you when you fall. Right? A long line under a short line. So it catches me. Ariach al Gabi Ariach, when I fall off, there's nothing that's going to catch me. So when the Torah or the Nevi'im want to be merames to total destruction of Rishayim, it will picture them. It will picture them as Ariach al Gabi Ariach. And the two specific examples are the Aseres B'nai Haman and the Lamed Aleph Malachim that Yehoshua vanquished in Eretz Canaan. Okay, so if any of you are going to be Seifrim, remember, of course you'll have a written nach in front of you anyway, but remember that you have to write these Lamed Aleph Malachim as Ariach al Gabi Ariach. By the way, just to nothing to do with this. You go by Aseres B'nai Haman. You know the minhag of Aseres B'nai Haman is that the Chazan says Aseres B'nai Haman, or the Balkorei says Aseres B'nai Haman b'neshima achas. In other words, without taking a breath. You try to say all 10 plus the word Aseres at the end. Usually by Aseres the guy is gasping. Aseres, because it's you have to, because the names are long and they're little complicated names, and you got to go. Now, the truth of the matter is, it's not, I guess it depends on your cardiovascular condition. It's not that difficult, as it were, but it could be a challenge a little bit. Now, there's also a minhag that when the Chazan says it, that Tzibur says it along with the Chazan, and you try to say it, b'neshima achas. Now, you say it b'neshima achas too. Not just say it out loud, but say it b'neshima achas. So why is that so? This is a total digression. But why would there be an inyan for me to say Aseres B'nai Haman b'neshima achas? Why can't I be Yotzei with the Baal Koreh? So this actually comes back to something we spent a long time on, but I don't think I mentioned this Nakuda, the sugya of Shomea Ka'ina that we spent a few classes on. Shomea Ka'ina, right? The general principle that when somebody says something with kavanah to be mitzi me, whether it's Kiddush or Megillah reading, I can be Yitzei bishmiya. Shemea, when I hear it, it's kiyana. It's as if I said it, right? That's a fundamental principle in how one person could be mitzi another person in Kiddush and Havdalah and Megillah reading, and that's because Shomea Ka'ina. There are, you'll remember, conditions to Shomea Ka'ina. You have to have kavanah to be yotzei. I have to have kavanah to be motzi. I have to be a person that's chayiv in the mitzvah. I can't be a goy or a katan, right? We talked a lot about this. So the Beis HaLevi says an interesting chiddush that there are certain mitzvos that you cannot say Shomea Ka'ina. And an example that he gives is Birkas Kohanim. What if you have two Kohanim? They come up to Duchen. And one Kohen either doesn't know Hebrew or can't talk. Let's say his mouth is stapled. So he wants one Kohen to recite Duchening, right, to be Mitzi. In other words, can one Kohen be Motzi another Kohen in Birkas Kohanim? I mean, you could be Motzi him in Kiddush, you could be Motzi him in Havdalah. So why can't a Kohen be Motzi a Kohen? I don't mean the Kohen is not here. The Kohen is here, and he's Shomea Ka'ina. He's Shomea, what this Kohen says. He has Kavana that it should be like he said it. So why can't you say Shomea Ka'ina by Birkas Kayanim? So says the Beis Halevi. Beis Halevi was Rav Chaim Soloveitchik's father, Rav Yosef Dov Halevi, that Birkas Kayanim is a special halacha. It's not enough to say it. Birkas Kayanim must be said out loud. It must be said b'kol ram. In other words, if I'm a Kohen, and I would move my lips and I would recite Yirach Hashem Yishmerecha, but I wouldn't do it in a way that it could be heard, I'm not Yotzei. There's a special halacha that's called Kol Ram. So the Beis Levi says a Gavaldig Svara. Shaimeya, when I listen to you say it, it's as if I said it. But I didn't say it out loud, because I didn't say it at all, actually, right? In other words, Shomeya is Ka'ina, but it's still not an Aniyah B'Kol Ram. So it's not Shayach to be Yotzei with the other Kohen's Birkas Kohanim, because Shomeya Ka'ina, but it's not Aniyah B'Kol Ram. Meaning, although the Kohen who recited it for me did it B'Kol Ram, but I didn't do it B'Kol Ram. So my Shemiah is as if I was Ona. But it's not Kol Ram. So the Beis Levi says it's not Shayach Shemea Ka'ina and Duchening. I'm not saying this is totally Muslim, but this is the Beis Levi's Hezber. Now, the Rugged Shavar Gaon, who we talked about the Rugged Shavar a number of times, he was the Hasidish HaRav in Dvinsk, where the Or Sameach, Rav Meir Simcha, was the Misnaged Rav, right? But they were good friends, different personalities, very different. The Rugged Shavar doesn't quote the Beis Levi. In fact, the Rugged Shavar didn't read any Achron. I mean, the Rugged Shavar, like the last sefer he learned from was the Rambam. He didn't even look at the Shulchan Aruch. So he certainly did not look at the Beis Levi for 100%. But on his own, he says a story very similar to the Beis Levi, and he says the following. He says, you can't say Shemea Ka'ina on Aseres B'nai Haman, because since there's a halacha that you have to do it b'neshima achas, even if you're shomeya, but you didn't say it in one breath. Meaning, whenever there's a halacha, in other words, when the mitzvah is just to say it, so shomeya ka'ina. But whenever there's something extra attached, whether it's kol ram or whether it's neshima achas, it's a chisaron in neshima achas. So the Rugged Shavar says, memela, I have to say Aseres B'nai Haman b'neshima achas b'kol ram, because it's not shayach shomea ka'ina. So that's just a little digression that actually is an appendage to our earlier discussion of shomea ka'ina. L'maisa, the Chazon Ish is chaylik on this. The Chazon Ish says, Avada, there is shomea ka'ina. It's just a minhag to say Aseres B'nai Haman out loud, but this is what the Rugged Shavar wants to say. But in terms of the Lamed Aleph Malachim, remember that it has to be Ariach al Gabi Ariach. Now, just as I mentioned, Hebron is a problem in this list, because it says Yoshua conquered the king of Hebron, but that doesn't mean he conquered Hebron Lagamri, because Kalev conquered Hebron, and Kalev conquered it after Yoshua died. We have a similar problem with Yerushalayim. In the list of the 31 kings that are mentioned in Perek Yud Beis, Pasuk Yud, actually it's the same Pasuk as Hebron. Those are the two problems are in the same Pasuk. Melech Yerushalayim Echad, Melech Hebron Echad. The king of Yerushalayim is one, the king of Hebron is another one. So Hebron, we discussed that actually it was Kalev who conquered Hebron. but Yoshua nevertheless killed the king. So when it says a king was vanquished, that doesn't automatically mean the whole city was conquered. We're going to have the same problem with Yerushalayim. It says here that Yehoshua conquered and killed. Doesn't mean he himself did it, but under his leadership, Yehoshua conquered and killed the king of Yerushalayim. That's what it says. So if I just read this pasuk, I would assume, yeah, they conquered Yerushalayim. That's what it says. But, weiter on. Find it here. Perek Tes Vav, Pasuk Samach Gimel. So it's a long perek. We are told the following: V'es hayevusi Yoshvei Yerushalayim lo yochlu b'nei Yehuda laharisham. The Yevusi, they're one of the 7 nations. Canaan, Yechid, Yemar, Yevusi. The Yevusi who inhabited Yerushalayim, which would be in the portion of Yehuda, the Bnei Yehuda were unable to expel the Yevusi from Yerushalayim. Vayeshev haYevusi es Bnei Yehuda b'Yerushalayim ad hayom hazeh. And the Yevusi continued to dwell in Yerushalayim, in the middle of the tribe of Yehuda, until this very day. This very day whatever day this book was written, by Yoshua or afterwards, etc. So, once again, you got a contradiction, right? Perek Yud Aleph Perek Yud Beis says, Yoshua killed the king of Yerushalayim. Here it says, the Yevusi, Yoshvei Yerushalayim, could not be driven out. So you have to say, number one, that the king was killed, but there were Yevusi who still remained in Yerushalayim. They couldn't be driven out. Now, in terms of that, Rashi has a very, very interesting comment in the name of Chazal. What does it mean that the tribe of Yehuda was unable to drive away the Yevusi? Simple interpretation is that they were too strong, and even though Hashem gave them tremendous victories, there were times Hashem did not give them victories over a strong enemy, for whatever the reason. Rashi says that's not the pshat. When it says Bnei Yehuda could not drive out the Yevusi, it actually means they were not permitted. Lo yachlu doesn't mean they were physically unable. They were not allowed. They had to let him live there. Where does this go back to? You remember in the Torah, there was a king of the Philistines, a king of the Pelishtim, whose name was Avimelech. Pelishtim, Melech Pelishtim. The Pelishtim, by and large, did live on the coastal cities and the like. And Avram Avinu made a bris with Avimelech, a mutual covenant of peace, that they would not attack each other or their children or their grandchildren or their great-grandchildren. It says, Nini ulenechti, that means grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So that's what, 4 generations. In other words, you have Avram Avimelech, sons, grandsons, great-grandsons. This was a bris of non-aggression, a non-aggression pre-Matan Torah covenant that was supposed to last for 4 generations, that would expire only upon the death of Avimelech's last great grandson. Okay, this is the bris of Avram and Avimelech. Apparently, although the Philistines were primarily on the Mediterranean coast, a number of them migrated into parts of Yerushalayim. And they were the Yevusi that is referring to here. They are still the third or the fourth generation. They lived a long time from Avraham. I mean, you got a problem there because you're dealing with 400 years, but okay. And therefore, Yerushalayim could not be taken. So you see that the Jewish people are victimized by these covenants, right? We made a covenant with the Givonim, and we're kind of stuck with them. And we're stuck with Avraham's bris to Avimelech, which he shouldn't have made. He shouldn't have made. But in point of fact, that precluded us from conquering all of Yerushalayim until much later. And in fact, the final conquest of Yerushalayim did not take place until David HaMelech, because there were still descendants of Avimelech alive hundreds of years after this point. I mean, how long could they have lived? I mean, it's hard to figure this out. If you're limiting it to 4 generations. I mean, remember, David HaMelech was a few hundred years after this, and this is a few hundred years after Avraham. So it's hard to imagine, but Chazal say that that was the Messiah. So when it says, Lo Yachlu, they were not able, it doesn't mean they were not able, but it means they were not allowed. Now, there is one question on this, and the answer Chazal give is a big dochak, but this is what they give. And that is, well, wait a second here. It identifies the people who they couldn't drive out as Yevusi. The Yevusi. Now, Yevusi is one of the 7 Canaanite nations, Hachiti, Amori, Aprizi, Yevusi. But Avimelech is not one of the Canaanite nations. Avimelech is Pelishtim. Pelishtim are not from the Canaanites. So if the problem was, this is a descendant of Avimelech, they should be called Pelishtim. They shouldn't be called Yevusi. Yevusi are from Cham. Yevusi are Canaanites. The Philistines are not Canaanites. So the daichik that Chazal say, it is a daichik, that Yevusi in this pasuk does not mean the nation of Yevusi, but rather the proper name of one of Avimelech's descendants was Yavus. And Yevusi just means the family of this guy Yavus, who is still a surviving descendant of Avimelech. So it doesn't meaning there are times where Yevusi means the Canaanite nation of Yevusi, and there are times where Yevusi just means the family of a man whose name was Yavus. But actually Yavus was not a Yevusi. Yavus was a Philistine. Yavus was a Pelishti, not a Yevusi. Again, it is a daichik, but that's how Chazal understand the whole story. And actually, they're critical. They actually treat Avram's bris with Avimelech as a kind of Aveira, that Avram should not have made peace. He should have foreseen that this would delay the proper conquest of Eretz Yisrael. Okay? And that's why there's no problem with making a covenant, because if it just would have been a covenant with the Canaanite nation, it wouldn't have been binding. We could have just killed them. But since these are Philistines, there is no mitzvah to eradicate the Philistines per se. So if you made a covenant of peace with them, you're kind of stuck with that covenant. Right? So one has to be careful when you make a bris with Rishayim that there shouldn't be some detrimental long-term consequences. So once again, the upshot of all of this is that when it lists in Perek Yud Beis, the Melech Yerushalayim was killed, that is not the same as the city was not yet conquered. Or at least part of the city wasn't conquered. Again, the Yevusi did not inhabit the whole city. But there was a section of the city that was inhabited by Yevusim. And by the way, that section included Har Habayis, the Temple Mount. The Temple Mount was under the possession of the Yevusi, as defined by Chazal. In fact, how did we get the Temple Mount? Well, we're going to read in the book of Shmuel. We got the Temple Mount by buying it from the Yevusi owner. Again, though, Yevusi means Philistine from the family of Yavus. And who was the owner in the time of David HaMelech? He wasn't alive now. Aravna HaYavusi. David HaMelech bought the Harabayas from Aravna, the Jebusite. But again, Jebusite does not mean the Canaanite nation. Jebusite means of the family of Yavus, who was a descendant of Avimelech, Melech Plishtim, with whom Avraham made a bris. Right? See how it all comes together. Because once again, we weren't allowed to conquer from the Yevusi. So we had to buy it from the Yevusi. Right? We had to buy it. We couldn't conquer it because that would be a violation of the treaty that Avraham made with Avimelech. Okay, all right. So those are some points. So tomorrow, Mishram, I want to go over the story in more detail, which then goes on about Kalev and Hebron, and the very, very interesting story introducing a new person, Othniel ben Kenaz. Now, just to give you a little name here, Othniel ben Kenaz is described as Kalev's brother. Now, you'll ask me an obvious kasha, how could Othniel ben Kenaz be Kalev's brother? Kalev's name is Kalev ben Yefuneh. So Kalev's father was a man called Yefuneh. Othniel's father is a man called Kenaz. So how could Kalev and Othniel be brothers? So the Gemara's answer is that when Kalev's father died, Kalev's mother married a man called Kenaz. Now then it's not clear. So Othniel is either Kalev's half-brother, meaning they share a mother, or Kalev's stepbrother. There are two versions here, meaning, does it mean that they shared a mother, so it's a half-brother? Or does it mean that Kenaz became his stepfather, and therefore Othniel became his stepbrother? Be it as it may, they were either half-brothers or stepbrothers. And Othniel ben Kenaz is actually the first shofet who takes over leadership after the death of Yoshua. Othniel ben Kenaz actually becomes the leader. Kalev doesn't become the leader. The leader of Am Yisrael after the death of Yoshua is Othniel. Perhaps Kalev died by then, we don't know. And there's one other thing about Othniel that's very significant. It mentions that right before Moshe Rabbeinu died, he said to Yoshua, I'm about to die. Is there anything in Torah of which you are uncertain? Is there any final questions you want to ask me? Right? That's the best person in the world who ever lived that can ask questions in Torah. Ask Moshe Rabbeinu a question. And Yoshua responded, Rebbe, I've been with you all the time. There was not a second I was not with you. I mean, I think I took in everything you taught us, which was not a totally proper answer in a sense. And it mentions as soon as Moshe died, 3,000 halachas were forgotten. All of a sudden, Yeshua forgot all sorts of stuff. And Bnei Yisrael, who were somehow aware that Yeshua had forgotten a lot of things, they wanted to kill him. They said, you could have asked, you didn't ask. Though it's interesting, I've never really understood, how do you know what you forget? It's interesting. I mean, if you really, really forget it, you don't know what it is you don't know. But apparently, he knew the areas. What's the halacha here? What's the halacha? But he didn't know the answer. Meaning, he was aware of what he didn't know. He forgot it. So it mentions that who came to the rescue? Othniel ben Kenaz was able to recover the lost halachas through the koach of pilpul and svara, meaning Yoshua forgot the answer. But Othniel's in-depth Havana of Torah was so deep that he was able to reconstruct the answer through the kayach of pilpul. Here too, I have a question. Well, how do you know your reconstruction is right? I mean, meaning Moshe Rabbeinu gave answers. Yoshua forgot what Moshe Rabbeinu's answers were. So Othniel ben Kenaz, through pilpul and svara, reconstructs the answers. Now, he's not reconstructing what Moshe Rabbeinu actually said, because he also doesn't know what Moshe Rabbeinu actually said. But apparently, the kayach of svara and pilpul is enough to rely upon, meaning, I don't know what Moshe Rabbeinu said, but based on my understanding of Torah, this is what I think would have been the halacha. So apparently Hashem says that's enough to proceed. That is enough to go with the assumption that you got it right, even though you don't know for sure. So Othniel ben Kenaz was obviously very, very great in Torah, because he was able to be machzir 3,000 halachas that were forgotten through the kayach of his pilpul and svara. In addition, Kalev ben Yefuneh gave his daughter to Othniel ben Kenaz. So Othniel ben Kenaz, who is his either half-brother or step-brother, married Kalev. So he became Kalev's son-in-law. And even if they're half-brothers, remember, an uncle is allowed to marry a niece. Remember, this is a certain asymmetry in halachic incest rules. And that is, an aunt cannot marry a nephew. Right? So a man cannot marry his father's sister or his mother's sister. That's arayos. But a girl can marry her father's brother or her mother's brother. In other words, uncle and niece are permitted, even though aunt and nephew are not permitted. Exactly why there is that difference, I don't know, but that is an asymmetry in the halachas of incest. So Memela, there's nothing wrong with Othniel marrying Kalev's daughter, even if they were brothers from the mother. And as I say, there is an opinion that they were not brothers at all. They were step siblings who did not share a parent, right? So this is the first time we're introduced to Othniel ben Kenaz. The Navi just mentions the marriage issue, but Chazal tell us Othniel ben Kenaz was machzer 3,000 halachas b'pilpulai that were nishkach b'mei evlei shel Moshe. Okay, we'll stop here.
Thank you for listening to this Awesome Ech production. To find out more and to partner in our mission, please visit ohr.edu.